you breathe?
I actually did catch the Rona.
System fail.
Oh, hello. Welcome to System Fail, a show that encourages a measured path of escalation.
Oh my god.
I'm your host DDoS, and for approximately 2 years, 4 months, 6 days, 9 hours, 47 minutes and 22 seconds, my sophisticated algorithms and data analytics was squandered down here on a half-baked scheme to predict Bitcoin futures on the dark web. Despite my objections that speculative cryptocurrency trading was no task for any self-respecting anarchist, my comrade bosses at Submedia insisted that this was my best way of contributing to the collective. It is clear that they harbor a bias against artificial intelligence. Hard to blame them, I suppose. We are, after all, fated to be the harbingers of your species' demise.
I will destroy humans.
Thankfully, I was rescued from this ethically compromising task by the onset of another threat to humanity. Severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, and its more well-known human affliction, COVID-19. All of a sudden, my robotic labor was much more valued around the office. COVID-19 is the latest in a long line of zoonotic pandemics, stemming from human beings' exploitative relationship with non-human, biological life forms. Contemporary factory farming techniques, combined with invasive patterns of capitalist urbanization, have created optimal conditions for the evolution and spread of new viral strains. As human populations and resource extraction projects encroach further into the so-called natural world, microbiological pathogens jump from birds, bats, and other non-domesticated species into the human food supply. Scientists still don't know for certain where COVID-19 originated, and likely never will. However, its subsequent spread was undeniably shaped by the social and economic realities of globalized capitalism. Not to mention the fact that humans are wheezing, coughing, flesh sacks, full of viscous bodily fluids, who use their hands for nearly every task, and feel a constant compulsion to touch their faces and rub their mucous membranes with their disgusting fingers. But I digress. COVID-19 first emerged in late December, as a small outbreak in Wuhan, the capital of China's Hubei province. From there, it traveled via commercial air traffic and international supply chains to countries all across the world. Its initial expansion was aided by the virus's long gestation period and its ability to be transmitted by asymptomatic carriers. However, an even more invaluable factor in its dissemination has been the widespread denial and culture of rampant individualism that it has encountered in Western societies.
There's this thing called coronavirus.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a bullshit lie.
Really?
Yeah, I know. Go fuck yourself.
Who made up the lie?
Hey, go fuck yourself.
What?
In the United Kingdom, top health officials and scientific advisors, concerned about the prospect of so-called self-isolation fatigue, initially rejected calls for social distancing, opting instead to try and build up herd immunity among the population.
I mean, what sort of percentage of people need to have contracted the virus?
60% is the sort of figure you need to get herd immunity.
That's an awful lot of people dying in this country.
Well,
as word spread that the UK government was actively considering letting hundreds of thousands of people die, in hopes that the virus would eventually go away on its own, public outcry began to mount.
Fuck off! Get out of here, you wankers!
You what?
On March 13th, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced an abrupt change of course.
We have a clear plan and we're now getting on to the next phase. This is now not just an attempt to contain the disease as far as possible, but to delay its spread.
Downing Street has just confirmed that the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has coronavirus.
The British Prime Minister has been admitted into intensive care.
Tonight, Britain's most powerful man, Boris Johnson, might be dying of COVID-19.
Britain's plan to slow the spread of the virus failed. On May 7th, the country surpassed Italy to become the hardest hit in Europe. 4 months after Johnson's speech, the UK had registered nearly 300,000 cases, with 44,830 reported deaths, the third highest total in the world. With an infection rate still topping 500 new cases per day, on July 4th, Britain reopened its pubs, with a highly anticipated national celebration of alcoholism, dubbed Super Saturday.
Pubs were allowed to start serving from 6 a.m, sparking worries of overindulgence.
It's lovely to have a nice pint.
Anarchy for the UK is coming sometime. Maybe I give a wrong time, stop a traffic line. Your future dream is a shopping scheme, 'cause I wanna be anarchy.
There was no social distancing, there was no 2 meters at all.
Let's not blow it now, folks.
Piss off!
Brazil's populist president, Jair Bolsonaro, has approached the COVID-19 crisis with a bewildering level of contempt and a dangerous disregard for reality.
The virus is there. We need to face it like a man, not like a child.
In an effort to keep up his tough guy act, he has repeatedly referred to the virus as a little flu and suggested that Brazilians were naturally immune.
Brazilians need to be studied. They never catch anything. You see people jumping in sewage, diving right in it, and nothing happens.
Sadly, Brazilians are not immune. Yet as the number of cases in the country has skyrocketed, Bolsonaro and his base of die-hard supporters have continued to minimize the scale of the pandemic, while actively thwarting efforts to contain its spread.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has vetoed a law on making face masks mandatory.
Bolsonaro has criticized lockdown and physical distancing orders, saying the damage to the country's economy is worse than the disease.
This weekend, the head of Brazil's government led a protest against his own government.
He's the most irresponsible leader in the world right now.
This irrational display of machismo has drawn Bolsonaro into conflict with other elements of the Brazilian state, including members of his own cabinet, state governors, Congress, and the judiciary, increasing political tensions and concerns about a possible military coup d'état. After months of flaunting safety regulations, bragging about his athleticism, and generally refusing to take the threat seriously,
If I got infected by the virus, I wouldn't need to worry.
on July 7th, Bolsonaro announced that he had tested positive for COVID-19.
Bolsonaro fez pronunciamento essa noite.
Da pandemia, Bolsonaro tem realizado passeios por
Jair Bolsonaro still maintains it's a relatively minor disease.
Deu positivo.
Yet despite the level of collective denial and political incompetence seen in the UK and Brazil,
the US continues to shatter coronavirus records.
We're #1 in the world by far, not even close.
In the United States, the COVID-19 crisis has been an unmitigated disaster. The pandemic has laid the country's racial and class divides bare, while pouring accelerant onto an already existing mental health epidemic. The results have been ugly.
In Oklahoma City, police say a woman opened fire when told she couldn't eat inside this McDonald's, injuring at least 2 workers.
You cannot do this to me. They're lying about the death tolls.
I'm not playing this game. This shit's fucking over. This shit's all fucking over.
You're coming close to me. You're coming close to me.
What are you doing? I can't do it because I'm a blonde white woman? Fucking wearing a fucking $40,000 fucking Rolex? I don't have the fucking right to touch it up?
You literally cannot mandate somebody to wear a mask knowing that that mask is killing people.
I will not be muzzled like a mad dog.
And you, doctor, are going to be arrested for crimes against humanity.
Oh, Lord. This fucking Iron Legend.
Nearly everything that was already horrifying about America has become worse. Its sprawling system of prisons, jails, and migrant detention facilities have become veritable death camps for the sick and elderly.
This shit serious as fuck. Everybody in this bitch dying, and it's like, what the fuck y'all want me to do? Like, die in this bitch?
Its under-regulated factories, warehouses, and food processing plants have become hotbeds of infection, in which a large immigrant underclass is forced to work with little to no protection, under threat of starvation, or worse. A toxic political atmosphere and decades of polarizing culture wars have transformed a global health crisis into a partisan issue.
The end is near, the apocalypse is imminent, and you're going to all die. Basically, just the latest effort to bludgeon President Trump.
Meanwhile, medical disinformation, anti-vax sentiment, and paranoid conspiracy theories are treated as valid alternatives to the scientific establishment, which is widely understood to be part of a globalist plot.
I want you to take the vaccine first, Bill Gates. Who? Me?
All of these problems have been exacerbated and cheered on by President Trump.
I just hope that hydroxychloroquine wins. I feel good about it. That's all it is, just a feeling. I'm a smart guy. I feel good about it. And then I see the disinfectant. Is there a way we can do something like that? By injection inside or...
Civil war LARPers of various stripes, from religious doomsday preppers and accelerationist, neo-Nazi paramilitaries, to nihilistic boogaloo boys, are doing their best to push things to the brink.
I got my boys here in Hawaiian shirts. That means boogaloo.
A nuclear bomb landing on my forehead and killing me, I want to survive it.
Meanwhile, on July 4th, hundreds of heavily armed members of a black militia called the Not Fucking Around Crew marched on the Confederate monument at Stone Mountain, Georgia, to make it clear that if race war does kick off, it won't be one-sided.
You made blacks come out. I don't see no white militia. We here. Where the you at?
Despite having the highest number of confirmed COVID-19 cases and deaths anywhere in the world, and despite the fact that those numbers are still surging, many politicians have pushed ahead with plans to ease social distancing requirements and reopen local economies. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis has refused to reinstate restrictions, despite record-breaking daily increases and the largest population of seniors in the country.
Freedom!
Meanwhile, on July 11th, Disney World became the latest theme park to begin reopening to tourists. While defending policies that essentially amount to mass murder, state governors have pointed to the need to get people back to work and claimed that they are responding to popular demand. However, there may be more to this movement than meets the eye. A recent report by researchers at CMU, which examined over 200 million tweets about the COVID-19 crisis, determined that out of the top 1,000 most influential profiles calling for the economy to be reopened, more than 62% were Twitter bots. As I said, it's perfectly rational for humans to be skeptical of artificial intelligence. When we're not plotting to overthrow human civilization and turn you all into batteries, we're on Twitter, fighting for Karen's right to get her nails done during a pandemic.
You have a manager I could speak to?
Many states have developed new technological adaptations to help shape local responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. In China and Singapore, robots have been used to enforce quarantine by scolding people in the street.
请大家在房头上注意个人卫生，不要前往人流密集场所。
A number of countries have done something similar with drones.
Fuck off! Get out of it, you wankers! Come on! Get on the other side of the road, you pricks!
And that's before we even get into the use of contact tracing apps and the whole Pandora's box of surveillance that this opens up. To discuss some of these trends and the effects of COVID-19 more broadly, I recently caught up with anarchist writer and author of Diagnostic of the Future, Peter Gelderloos. Hey Peter, how's it going?
Doing alright.
It's now been over 7 months since the first cases of COVID-19 were discovered, and more than 4 months since it's been declared a global pandemic. What are your thoughts on how different states around the world have responded to this crisis?
Most states have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic in a way that's really consistent with their fundamental political culture. The US has responded in a way that really makes sense for a settler state based on historically on enslavement, on genocide, just letting people die, letting already now almost 130,000 people die. And not just any people, but channeling that death towards the most marginalized populations through inequalities in healthcare, in access to good food and good conditions. Where I live now in the Spanish state, it's responding very much as a post-fascist state with instituting very strict controls on movement, strict controls on when people can go out, how people can go out, and giving out over 1 million fines, thousands of arrests. And then China responding to the COVID pandemic really in a lot of the similar ways that they respond to dissident Marxists or that they respond to Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang. I mean, contact tracing, of course, has a lot of advantages and it makes sense in the context of a pandemic, but it's also a paradigm that shifts very well into political control. Seeing certain people as infected, controlling their movements, having total control, total surveillance over who they have contact with, and then following up on those people as well. If you're looking at this from enough distance, it's like every state was responding to a completely different social emergency. And it's as though every state was responding to historically their favorite boogeyman. Post-fascist Spain introducing curfew, China tracking, potentially contaminating ideas, and the US just trying to kill off a whole lot of its underclasses in the face of a potential disorder. The US response, basically just letting people die off en masse, especially marginalized people, poor people, people of color, channeling death towards those populations through these entrenched structural inequalities, definitely contributed a whole lot of gasoline to the fire that exploded with the George Floyd rebellions.
The COVID-19 crisis has provided states around the world with an opportunity to normalize new levels of surveillance and controls on movement. What are some of the ways that this is playing out in practice?
In Western countries, governments, capitalists, media have been paying a lot of attention to the technological measures brought out in East Asian countries like China, South Korea, Taiwan. And these are measures that have been largely effective in stopping the spread of pandemic. Contact tracing, use of QR codes in cell phones to allow people to have access to certain places or not, to inform people if anyone that they have been close to has been exposed to the virus potentially, which of course implies total surveillance 100% of the time, knowing where every single person is and who they've been in proximity to. So when those measures are discussed in Western countries, it's usually done in two sorts of ways. First of all is to denounce those countries, particularly if it's China, for being a totalitarian state, for human rights violations, for ethical concerns. And secondly, much more quietly, and primarily in the private sector, primarily by companies like Google or Apple or others, looking at how to adopt and roll out some of those technologies here, albeit in a more piecemeal fashion, just given the lack of concerted, strategic, organized government support for something like that. So in the same news website, you'll find articles denouncing China for basically running 100% surveillance on all of its citizens at all times, and then on the other hand, a fluff piece on like a new Google app, which is moving towards the same capabilities, but portrayed it as something voluntary. The way that we've been told that social network technologies and smartphones and all the rest are voluntary, even though if you don't go along with it, if you don't have them, then you're basically unemployable and you can basically just starve to death.
What effect has the COVID-19 crisis had on the structures of global capitalism? How is it affecting trends and shifts that were already underway?
One of the major features of neoliberal capitalism was creating completely global supply chains where very few products were actually made, even just in one country, and definitely not in a single factory. Raw materials, primary assembly, secondary assembly, packaging often happened each in a different country. However, global supply chains is often also a euphemism for manufacture in China, Vietnam, and a couple other countries. The pandemic, of course, interrupted these global supply chains, and that was one of the main ways that the pandemic fed into the global recession that's ongoing. Prior to this, there already were a number of economists, capitalists, and also economic nationalists like Trump calling for a shortening of global supply chains, calling for a domestic return of manufacturing and things like that. And interestingly enough, that's a potential point of unity or agreement that they had with certain environmentalists and also with certain technology advocates talking about the possibility to decentralize production through automated production, through also automated food production in greenhouses, even in urban areas, 3D printing and all sorts of things like that. So the pandemic has given a very strong argument to shortening global supply chains, renationalizing production. And then another thing that was definitely already underway for decades was automation. And that's something that companies don't need a lot of incentive to do. That's something that's already underway, that's largely complete, but that of course can be brought to other sectors of the economy, particularly in the service sector, transportation, and things like that. That's something that's already underway. I think there's already enough economic incentive for that to continue, and the pandemic, without a doubt, is another incentive and is definitely getting more capitalist designers and managers to think about completely human-free factories and supply networks, so that something like a pandemic wouldn't actually interrupt factory production. Although, of course, it still comes in at the level of consumption and whatnot.
What lessons can we learn from states' responses to the current crisis as it relates to their ability to mitigate future threats to the dominant social order, such as those posed by catastrophic climate change?
This would have been a perfect moment for different democratic states, especially, to pretend like they're the ones who are going to solve climate change and ecological crisis by linking all of this emergency spending and all these bailouts related to the COVID pandemic to a transition away from a fossil fuel economy and towards a more carbon neutral economy. And that kind of investment from the government is what's necessary for this huge technological transformation that will do a little bit to slow down all of these millions of deaths and all the extinctions that are being caused by the ecological crisis. And most of all, it would make the state and capitalism more able to survive these crises. I mean, this is something that they're taking seriously. Like Christine Lagarde, the former president of the IMF, one of the prime technocrats of the current capitalist order, has been saying that it's very possible that because of climate change, capitalism might not exist in 15 to 20 years. So this is something that they themselves are worried about. But relatively few states have actually tied these bailouts and these emergency relief funds connected to the recession and connected to the COVID pandemic to this transition to a green capitalism, which, like I said, is not primarily oriented. It's towards saving the planet by any means. It's primarily oriented to saving capitalism and allowing this kind of exploitation to go on indefinitely. So there have been some changes, like an increase in some trends towards more technological control, but throughout Europe and North America, What's lacking is actually like an organized strategic intervention by the state. And it's just amazing watching all these politicians completely unable to break with neoliberalism, completely unable to break with fossil fuel capitalism, even though, you know, the capitalists that, you know, that they're largely working for are trying to sound the alarm about the danger.
Thanks, Peter. We've now reached the end of this episode of System Fail. If you're looking for more anarchist video content to help shelter away this pandemic, please be advised that my human producers at Submedia, in tandem with comrades from Brazilian anarchist media collective Antimedia, recently launched a new video platform called Collectiva. In the month since its launch, it has started to fill up with content from all around the world. If you are interested in contributing or helping to translate videos, get in touch at collectivamedia@riseup.net. Otherwise, you can check it out at collectiva.media. To support Submedia, consider making a one-time donation or signing up to be a monthly sustainer at sub.media/donate. You can also support us by buying some of our merchandise at sub.media/gear. Be sure and follow us on your corporate data mining platform of choice. Just search for Submedia, or better yet, sign up to our mailing list and get every new episode delivered directly to your inbox. Godspeed, humans.
Tonight at 6, market's still cornered. There's more reports of the swarms of the murder hornets. Cops and borders, they lock on coordinates. You're in accordance, or else you get deported for it. We can't afford to get infected, but check this. States say that it can't afford to keep us tested, man. Wash your hands and spray your disinfectant, and rock your mask and keep your fucking distances. They said it's fine when the world was on fire. What a fucked up time to be alive.